Welcome to Ghostlore Chronicles. Tonight's tale is of the Headless Rider, a curse that returns every Halloween, galloping through the mist, searching for its next victim. Are you ready to face the legend? The first time I heard about the haunted bridge outside Sleepy Hollow, I laughed it off as just another ghost story, one of those small-town legends people whispered around Halloween. But that was before I saw it myself. Before the shadows of that night began following me even here, in Chicago, where I thought the city lights could keep the darkness away. My name doesn't matter. What matters is what I experienced, and how the story that began as a harmless local legend has grown into something far larger. Something that reaches across states, creeping into dreams, pulling at the fragile seam between the living and the dead. If you've ever driven at night and felt that sudden drop in your stomach, that coldness on the back of your neck as if someone unseen was watching from the roadside, then you already know the feeling. That's where my story begins. It was late October, the air already carrying the weight of winter. I had been driving east, away from Chicago, chasing interviews for a documentary project about American folklore. I'd been to places in Wisconsin where people swore they'd seen phantom hitchhikers, and to old farmhouses in Iowa where families claimed something clawed at their doors at night. But it was in New York, near Sleepy Hollow, that I found the story that refused to let me go. The bridge was old, more like a tunnel of sagging wooden beams than anything else. Mist clung to it at night, rolling in from the river, thick enough to hide what was waiting on the other side. Drivers said that every Halloween, at the stroke of midnight, a headless rider appeared on horseback, charging out of the fog and galloping past any car caught crossing at that moment. Some swore the horse's hooves struck sparks on the pavement. Others claimed the figure passed right through their windshields, leaving frost on the glass and a stench of smoke in the air. I didn't believe it. Not then. I set up my first interviews in town. A retired police officer, Tom Gallagher, told me the story with his eyes fixed on the floor, as if saying it aloud could summon the thing. "I seen it twice," he muttered. "Once in '87 and once in 2001. Both times mist came out of nowhere. Then I heard the hooves. Not normal hooves either, like steel on steel. When he passed me, I swear the air turned colder than a freezer. And then he was gone. Just gone." Another woman, Maria Santos, who worked at a diner off the highway, told me she lost her brother on that bridge. He was driving home after work one night, around Halloween. They found his car at the far side of the bridge, engine still running, door wide open. He was never seen again. "You tell me how that happens." I recorded everything. Their voices trembled in the playback, as if the fear itself carried over through the microphone. The deeper I dug, the stranger the accounts became. A college student said she saw the rider holding a burning pumpkin in place of a head. A delivery truck driver claimed the rider's horse had no eyes, just hollow sockets glowing red like coals. A man living near the river swore he found hoof prints in the mud one morning, steaming as if freshly made, though no horses were anywhere nearby. I told myself these were just stories, born from imagination, alcohol, or Halloween pranks. But each night I felt the weight of the interviews on me. I started dreaming of hooves, of galloping shadows that shook the ground beneath my bed. Then came the night I decided to see it for myself. It was October 30th, the eve of Halloween. The sky was swollen with dark clouds, and the air smelled like rain and old leaves. I parked near the bridge just before midnight, setting up a camera on the dashboard and a recorder on the passenger seat. My hands shook as I turned off the engine. Silence fell around me, so thick I could hear my own pulse in my ears. First, there was nothing, just the mist creeping in, curling like fingers around the bridge. My headlights caught the fog and turned it into a wall of shifting white. I remember thinking how easy it would be to imagine shapes in there, easy to trick myself. Then I heard it. Hooves, slow at first, distant like a horse walking on stone far away. But they grew louder, closer. Each strike echoed through the wooden beams of the bridge. My throat tightened, and my hands clenched the steering wheel. The mist thickened until it pressed against the glass. And then through it a shadow moved, tall, mounted, gliding forward with unnatural speed. I could see the horse's mane whipping, its body solid yet somehow blurred by the fog, and on its back the rider, no head, just a broad set of shoulders, a cloak whipping in the wind. Where the head should have been, there was nothing but emptiness, a dark hollow that seemed to draw the mist inward. The horse screamed, a sound that was less animal and more human, a howl that froze my blood. The figure leaned forward as if charging straight at me. My instinct screamed at me to start the car, but my body wouldn't move. I sat frozen as the rider galloped closer and closer until it filled the entire windshield. And then it passed straight through me. The cold was indescribable, not just air-chilling cold, but something that went inside me, filling my chest, scraping through my veins. My vision went white. For a moment I thought I was dead. When I blinked, the bridge was empty again, silent. The mist was already thinning, retreating into the night as if nothing had happened. But something had happened, because when I looked at the camera, the screen was black. Dead. The recorder had stopped at the exact moment the hooves began. My car wouldn't start for nearly 10 minutes, and when it finally did, I drove back to town with tears running down my face and my hands trembling too badly to hold the wheel steady. I told myself I'd leave the story there, that some legends weren't meant to be captured. But when I returned to Chicago, the haunting followed me. The first sign was the sound of hooves outside my apartment, though I lived 6 floors up in a concrete building. Then came the mist, rolling down hallways, curling under my door. And the dreams, always the dreams. The headless rider, reaching for me with invisible hands. And then, the disappearances began. The first disappearance was a neighbor of mine, a quiet man named Leonard who lived 2 doors down. He was the kind of guy you barely noticed, always in the same brown jacket, always polite but distant. One night, I heard a knock on my door. When I opened it, the hallway was empty, except for a faint mist curling along the floor. I shut the door quickly, telling myself it was just a draft from the stairwell. The next morning, police were outside Leonard's apartment. The door was ajar, lights on, television still flickering. But Leonard was gone. No forced entry, no signs of struggle. Just gone. I didn't tell them what I saw. How could I? How do you explain mist in a concrete hallway when there are no windows, no leaks, nothing? How do you explain a phantom knock from hands that weren't there? I tried to bury myself in my work, editing the interviews from Sleepy Hollow, hoping to distract myself. But the footage was wrong. Some files wouldn't open, showing only static. In one clip, when Maria spoke about her missing brother, a shadow moved across the frame behind her. Tall, hunched, shaped like a rider on horseback. She hadn't noticed it. Neither had I until I played it back alone at 3 in the morning. The sound started then. Hooves again, echoing faintly from the street below, even though no horses had ever walked that neighborhood. I leaned out the window once, desperate to prove it was my imagination. The street was deserted, damp from rain, the lamplight flickering. But in the thin film of water on the asphalt, I could see them, hoof prints, fresh, steaming, fading as I watched. I knew I couldn't keep this to myself. I started reaching out to people who had once lived near Sleepy Hollow, or claimed to have seen the rider. Some answered, hesitant but willing. Others hung up the second I mentioned the bridge. One man agreed to meet me in a bar on the west side. His name was Daniel Price, a trucker who used to run deliveries through New York. He was pale, gaunt, and had the look of someone who hadn't slept in weeks. He spoke in a low, hurried voice, glancing at the door every few minutes. "I saw him in '09, Daniel said, his hands trembling around his glass. "Middle of the night, on the bridge. I tried to outrun him in my rig. He passed right through. I couldn't breathe for what felt like hours. And since then, he's followed me, state to state. I'll wake up on the road, mist in the cab, hoof prints in the dust on my trailer. He doesn't stay in Sleepy Hollow anymore. He follows the ones who see him." I asked him what he thought the rider wanted. Daniel leaned forward, his eyes wide and bloodshot. "He wants replacements," he whispered. "He lost his head in battle and now he takes others. He takes their souls, drags them into whatever fog he crawled out of. The bridge is just the door. Once you've seen him, you're marked. I wanted to dismiss him as paranoid, but every word felt like confirmation of what was happening to me. Before I could ask more, Daniel's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, went pale, and left the table without another word. I watched him step outside into the drizzle. When I followed minutes later, he was gone. The street was empty. Only the sound of hooves fading into the distance remained. Over the next week, the mist became a constant presence. Sometimes it pooled in corners of my apartment, thin enough to dismiss as steam. Other nights it poured in thick, until I couldn't see the far wall. My neighbors began disappearing one by one. First Leonard, then a woman down the hall, then a teenager who lived upstairs. The police asked questions, but I said nothing. How could I? Their bodies weren't gone because of crime. They had been taken. The dreams deepened, turning violent. I dreamed of standing on the bridge again, the horse's scream echoing as the rider charged me. But instead of passing through, he stopped. He dismounted. He walked toward me, invisible hands reaching out. I woke each time with frost on my sheets, my breath clouding in the air. In desperation, I called Tom Gallagher, the retired cop from Sleepy Hollow. His voice cracked when he heard mine. I told you not to go there. Once you see him, he doesn't stop. He doesn't forget. What do? I begged. How do I stop him? There was a long pause. Then Tom said, "You can't. Not alone. But maybe if you learn what binds him, you can sever it. They say his skull was never buried, that he rides until he finds it again. But every year he strays further from the place he died. And now, it sounds like he's chosen you." The line went dead before I could ask more. That night, the mist filled my apartment completely. I couldn't see my own hands. I stumbled into the hallway, coughing, my lungs burning from the cold, damp air. And then I heard the horse again inside the building. Hooves striking tile, impossible yet deafening. I ran down the stairwell, heart hammering, until I burst into the street. The mist followed me, curling out of the doorway, spilling into the city like smoke from a fire. And at the center of it, towering over the fog, was the rider. Headless, cloaked, the horse's eyes burning like coals. He raised one hand, empty, skeletal, yet filled with command, and pointed directly at me. The world tilted. The sound of hooves drowned everything. Then came the second disappearance. And this time, it wasn't a neighbor. It was someone I knew. It was my friend Angela who vanished next. She was one of the few people I trusted enough to tell about what was happening. Angela worked as a journalist, sharp and skeptical, never one to believe in ghost stories. When I called her, I half hoped she would laugh at me, tell me I was being paranoid. Instead, she listened in silence, and when I finished, she said, "If this is real, I want to see it for myself." I begged her not to, but she came over that night anyway. She brought her camera gear, notebooks, the same way she'd cover a normal story. For a while, everything was calm. We sat in my apartment, lights blazing, windows open to the city noise outside. Nothing happened. No mist, no hooves. She smirked at me, scribbling in her notebook. Stress, sleep deprivation. That's all it is. But at 2:13 a.m., the power went out. The apartment plunged into blackness. I heard Angela's breath catch as the room filled with mist, denser than I had ever seen. It rolled across the floor in thick waves, swallowing the furniture, swallowing us. I fumbled for a flashlight, but when the beam cut through the fog, Angela was gone. Her chair was empty. Her notebook lay open on the table, pen still resting across the page. The mist retreated within minutes, leaving only silence. I tore through the apartment, shouting her name. Nothing. Her camera bag remained, zipped and untouched. But Angela had been taken. The police questioned me for hours. They searched the building, dragged the river, issued bulletins. No trace. I didn't tell them about the rider. Couldn't. They would have locked me away. But deep inside, I knew the truth. Angela was gone, and it was my fault. After that night, I stopped sleeping. I buried myself in research, combing through old archives, local histories, even war records. If there was any chance of ending this, I had to know where it began. And the deeper I dug, the darker it grew. The legend of the Headless Rider wasn't confined to Sleepy Hollow. Variations stretched back centuries, across states, across oceans. In Europe, there were tales of the Dullahan, a headless figure who carried his skull under one arm, riding at night to claim souls. In old Revolutionary War accounts, there were reports of Hessian soldiers decapitated in battle, their spirits said to roam the countryside searching for their heads. The bridge at Sleepy Hollow seemed to be just one doorway among many, a place where the veil was thin enough for the rider to pass through. What unsettled me most were the testimonies buried in forgotten newspapers. Reports of disappearances in towns hundreds of miles apart, all near bridges, all around Halloween. Survivors described the same thing. Hooves missed, a rider without a head. The pattern stretched like a scar across the country. And each time, those who saw him carried the haunting with them, as if marked, just as Daniel had said. One article chilled me to the bone. From 1923, about a farmer's son who vanished after claiming he'd seen a headless soldier riding past the family's barn. Days later, the barn itself burned to the ground. Witnesses swore they saw a rider in the smoke. And scrawled in the ash, found near the ruins, was a single word, mine. I read until my eyes bled. Angela's face haunted me. Her laugh, her stubbornness, her disbelief. I couldn't let her become just another lost name in an old story. I had to understand what the writer wanted. That's when I found the legend of the missing skull. According to one historian, the Hessian soldier who inspired the tale had been buried hastily after a skirmish. His body left in a shallow grave, his head never recovered. The bridge became his hunting ground, his portal, a place where he searched endlessly for what was stolen from him. But somewhere along the line, the search had twisted. He was no longer looking for his own skull. He was collecting others. I couldn't stop thinking about Tom Gallagher's words. Maybe if you learn what binds him, you can sever it. If the skull was the key, then perhaps it was the only way to end this. But where would I even begin to look for something lost for centuries? And if I found it, what then? The rider was no longer content with the bridge. He was in my city, my home, spreading like a plague. I saw mist curling out of subway tunnels, seeping through alleys. I heard hoofbeats in parking garages. People vanished one by one. Every day the news reported another missing person. They never returned. I went back through Angela's notebook, the last thing she left behind. On the final page, beneath half-written notes, were words I didn't remember her writing. He knows you. He wants you next. I slammed the book shut, heart racing. Did she write that before the mist swallowed her? Or had something else written it after she was gone? That night I dreamed again. But this time it wasn't the bridge. It was a battlefield. Muddy ground littered with bodies. Cannons thundering in the distance. And in the middle of it all, a soldier lay sprawled, his uniform torn, his neck a raw stump. His head was gone. As I watched, the body twitched, rose slowly, climbed onto a horse, and rode toward me. The eyes of the horse burned red. The rider had no head, but somehow I felt his gaze lock onto mine. I woke gasping, sweat freezing on my skin. And there, at the foot of my bed, the mist churned. Shapes moved within it, shadows writhing. For a moment I saw Angela's face, pale and terrified, her mouth open in a silent scream, before the fog swallowed her whole. I knew then that the rider wasn't just hunting me. He was building something, a collection, a legion of the taken. And unless I found a way to stop him, I would be next. The city began to unravel. It started with the mist, seeping into places it didn't belong. Office buildings, hospitals, even schools reported sudden floods of fog rolling down hallways. Security cameras showed it moving with intent, as if it were alive, curling toward people before the feeds cut to static. Those who vanished left everything behind. Cars idling, doors open, meals still warm on their tables. The police blamed crime, abductions, gangs. But I knew the truth. The rider was expanding his reach. I stopped going to work. I stopped answering calls. My apartment became a bunker, though it offered no real protection. I taped over the vents, sealed the windows, but the mist still found ways inside. I heard hoofbeats on the roof, in the stairwells, echoing from impossible places. Every knock on the door made me flinch. Every shadow held his shape. Desperation drove me back to Tom Gallagher. I tracked him down to a nursing home outside Sleepy Hollow. His face lit with fear the moment he saw me, as if I carried the rider in my shadow. "You shouldn't be here," he hissed. "He's already claimed too much from you." I begged him for answers, anything I could use to fight back. He shook his head. "There's no fighting him. He was born in blood and war, and he's bound to that hunger. The skull is the only key. Without it, he will ride until the end of time, taking souls to fill the void where his head should be." "Where is it?" I demanded. My voice cracked, louder than I meant. Silence fell over the room. For a long moment, Tom only stared at me, his eyes full of pity. "No one knows," he finally whispered. "But if you keep searching, he'll find you faster." He refused to say more. But that night, as I left the nursing home, I found something slipped into my coat pocket. A folded map, old and yellowing. A section of riverbank circled in red, near the ruins of an abandoned church. I didn't know if it was from Tom or something darker, but I followed it. I drove for hours through the rain until I reached the place. The church was nothing more than a skeleton of stone walls. Roof collapsed long ago. The river ran black beside it, swollen from the storm. And there, in the mud near the bank, I found it. A skull, half-buried, stained dark with centuries of soil. The bone was cracked, jagged at the base. Empty sockets stared up at me. The air turned cold as I lifted it. Mist surged from the river, rolling over the ground in thick waves. And then I heard him, hooves, fast, furious, bearing down on me. The rider erupted from the fog, horse screaming, cloak whipping. For the first time, he slowed. He reached out not to strike, but to grasp the skull in my hands. I don't know why, but I ran. I clutched the skull to my chest and fled into the woods, branches tearing at my arms, the sound of pursuit crashing behind me. The mist followed, twisting through the trees, choking the air. The hoofbeats shook the ground. No matter how fast I ran, he was closer with every stride. I stumbled into a clearing and dropped to my knees, the skull still in my arms. My lungs burned, my vision swam. The rider loomed at the edge of the clearing, horse's eyes blazing. He raised a hand, and the mist thickened, pressing down like a weight. My body felt frozen, my will breaking, but something in the skull resisted. The sockets glowed faintly, a pale blue light that pulsed like a heartbeat. The rider recoiled, as if the bone itself wounded him. I held it higher, and the light grew, searing through the fog. The horse reared, screaming. The rider clutched at the void where his head should be, staggering backward. For a moment, I thought it was over, that I had found the weapon to end him. But the light died as quickly as it flared, leaving only the empty skull in my hands. The rider steadied himself. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his arm and pointed at me. The mist surged again, and I knew he would not stop until he claimed what I carried. I ran until dawn. When I reached the city again, I was hollow, broken, the skull hidden in my bag. I didn't know what it meant, only that the rider wanted it back, and that it gave me the smallest edge against him. But the price was clear. As long as I had it, the hunt would never end. The news that morning was worse than ever. Entire families missing from their homes. Whole apartment blocks abandoned overnight, doors left swinging open. The mist had spread across Chicago, swallowing blocks at a time. And everywhere, people whispered the same word, rider. I sat in my darkened apartment, the skull heavy on the table in front of me, Angela's notebook beside it. The city outside screamed with sirens, helicopters, the chaos of a place losing its grip on reality. I knew the truth. This wasn't just my haunting anymore. The rider had come for everyone. And it was only a matter of time before he took me, too. I couldn't run anymore. The skull sat on the table, daring me to decide. Every instinct told me to destroy it, to smash it into dust. But something deeper whispered that destroying it would only bind the rider tighter, making him unstoppable. The only way to end it was to return it, to bury it where it belonged, to complete what had been broken centuries ago. I wrapped the skull in a cloth and left my apartment. The streets were unrecognizable. Mist coiled through every alley, pouring from subway grates, swallowing entire intersections. Police cruisers sat abandoned with their lights still flashing. Storefronts stood open. Their owners vanished mid-shift. It wasn't just a haunting anymore. The city was dying. I drove blind through the fog, guided only by the map Tom had given me. The church by the river called to me, its ruins looming like broken teeth against the night sky. As I stepped from the car, the mist thickened so quickly I could barely see my hands. The skull pulsed faintly in my arms, as if alive. And then came the sound. Hooves, hundreds of them, echoing in every direction. I staggered through the graveyard beside the church, tombstones jutting like crooked fingers. Shadows writhed in the mist, shapes that looked human but twisted, their mouths open in silent screams. I recognized some of them, faces of neighbors, of strangers from the news, even Angela. They drifted closer, their eyes hollow, their forms flickering like dying light. The rider's collection, the souls he had taken. I fell to my knees, clutching the skull, and shouted into the void. "What do you want from me?" The answer came not in words but in presence. The rider emerged from the fog, horse stamping, eyes blazing red. He dismounted slowly, each step shaking the ground. He stood before me, taller than any man, a headless silhouette of rage and hunger. He raised his hand, pointing at the skull. My body screamed to surrender, to give it to him and end the torment. But deep down I knew, if I handed it over, he would never stop. He would grow stronger, unstoppable, and the world itself would drown in mist. I dug into the earth with my bare hands. The soil was wet, clinging, refusing to give. The rider strode closer, the souls circling, whispering, reaching out with phantom fingers. I shoved the skull into the ground and clawed the dirt over it, praying it would be enough. The rider howled, a sound that split the air like thunder. His horse reared, screaming, its body wreathed in fire. The mist convulsed, whipping into a storm that tore branches from trees and stones from the church walls. I threw myself over the shallow grave, holding the earth closed as the wind ripped at my body. The ground shook. The skull pulsed beneath the soil, brighter and brighter, until light burst upward like a fountain. The rider staggered, clutching his neck, the void where his head should be twisting, collapsing inward. The souls screamed, their faces melting into smoke, their forms unraveling in the light. One by one, they were dragged downward, sucked into the grave, into the earth, into silence. The rider let out one final roar before he was pulled into the light, his body collapsing into ash, his horse disintegrating into flame and mist. The storm raged for a heartbeat longer, and then everything went still. I lay in the graveyard, the dawn just beginning to break, the ruins quiet around me. The skull was gone, buried deep, sealed. The mist had vanished. For the first time in weeks, the city was clear. I thought it was over. I thought I had won. But as I stumbled back to my car, I caught sight of the river. The water moved strangely, swirling against the current, spinning into a vortex. And in the depths of that whirlpool, just for a moment, I saw them. Faces, hundreds of them, Angela among them, staring up at me, mouth open in a scream I couldn't hear. I turned away, heart breaking, because I understood the truth. The rider wasn't destroyed. He was buried, bound, waiting. His skull had been returned, but his hunger would never die. The bridge, the mist, the hooves, they would rise again. Not tomorrow, not next year, but someday. When the earth shifted, when the grave cracked open, when someone foolish enough to chase a legend found what I had buried. And when that day comes, the rider will ride again. I survived, but I'm no hero. I'm only the messenger. If you hear hooves on a lonely night, if you see mist where it doesn't belong, turn back. Don't look. Don't listen. Don't follow. Because once you've seen him, he'll never let you go.